Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Future of Work series here at Cornell University's ILR School. I am Louis Hyman, a professor and director of the Institute for Workplace Studies here in New York City. We are both live in New York, where we are enjoying pleasurable hors d'oeuvres and wine. And then we're also online with people. Hello, which group is it? Hello, big hello to the Crowd Research Group in Bulgaria, who is joining us at 2 in the morning. We're huge in Bulgaria. So here tonight to talk about important issues with thinking about how workers are organizing in the digital economy. And it's obvious how technology has worked to disorganize labor, allowing businesses to quickly flit around the world from market to market, from place to place. But what's less obvious is how technology can be used to organize workers, both online and in real life, or IRL, as I confusingly wrote in the description of tonight's event, at least for those who are over the age of 30. Now, historically, I'm a historian, to put on my historian's hat for a second. New forms of technology have been used by both labor and capital to enact power in the workplace. Telegraph lines, for instance, allowed railroads to spread nationally, but those same telegraph lines allowed workers to strike nationally, and that's what gave us 1877. And if you don't know what that is, just go to Wikipedia and type 1877, what happened? So tonight we'll be talking with someone at the forefront of thinking and doing when it comes to these issues of technology, these issues of labor and data, these issues of the digital and the real-world economy. We have Michelle Miller. Now, Michelle Miller is the co-founder of coworker.org, which is a digital platform for workers' voice. Before she founded this, Michelle spent a decade at the Service Employees International Union, the SEIU, where she pioneered creative projects that advanced union campaigns. Since its founding in 2013, coworker.org has catalyzed the growth of global independent employee networks, that is, workers organizing themselves from the ground up, advancing wins like paid parental leaves at Netflix, scheduling reform at Starbucks, and wage increases for REI employees, among many others. There's also important cultural wins with tattoos,
yes,
which matter for many a young person of a cool persuasion. Yeah. Coworker.org is the way for workers to self-organize and to push back against employers in both old-fashioned and in novel ways, pointing towards what labor relations might look like in the future of work. So please welcome Michelle Miller.
Thank you, Louis. I really appreciate being here. And I, as Louis said, coworker.org is a very, in short, a digital platform for worker voice. And I just wanted to start by talking about very broadly both what we're trying to do in the long term at coworker.org and also the economic context in which we are operating right now that sort of influences the ways in which workers are having to organize and the issues over which they're bargaining with their employers or their non-employers, but people who pay them for things. First of all, when we launched coworker.org, we really launched it in response to what we saw as workers using popular technology tools to attempt to self-organize. My co-founder and I were both in the traditional trade union movement, and we were, I did a lot of worker training and leadership development. My co-founder helped do some of the first digital worker organizing for the union, but we really felt like there were all of these workers who were out online trying to organize themselves, and because of the arcane design of the National Labor Relations Act, really had no access to the expertise and the history that was sort of locked inside the labor movement. And we wanted to know what would happen if we met those workers where they were, and we started to offer them both the kinds of technology that could help them form long-term networks, and also the kind of expertise and history that could help them think more deeply about how to leverage their own power. And we do this in the context of a trade union movement which is unfortunately dying, currently in a federal context in which probably not a lot of really good news is going to come out of the agencies anytime soon, in a moment when the economy is changing rapidly and where we really need to figure out what are the new forms of worker power that are going to enable people to have some amount of agency in the economy as it changes. And so that's really what we see our job as. We believe that by supporting workers in initiating their own campaigns and initiating their own efforts for change, we can start to see what the seeds are for the next forms of worker power, and that's not a solution we're ever going to come to by a bunch of labor organizers sitting in a room, but by actually being out there with workers themselves. And so that's really what our vision is. We have about 500,000 users at this point, and we've been around for about 4 years. So that's our vision, and I will tell you more in detail about coworker.org in a minute, but before I do that, I really also wanted to talk about the context in which we are operating in 2017 in our economy, and about the changes that we see happening that are actually going to have incredible impacts on workers. And the reason for that is I've been thinking a lot about this. I've been thinking about what have been the drivers of this incredible boom in technology over the past 10 years that has both reshaped and restructured how people are accessing work and also created opportunities for us to engage in organizing that we've never seen before. And I started thinking about that actually because I had been asked by a group of funders in the economic justice space to answer this question that they put forth to me that was, are digital tools overhyped? Are we paying too much attention to digital, and should we be doing other things and funding other things in this moment? Do they really matter? Should we be paying attention to what's happening online? And my initial response was actually just going to be like, you don't have a choice. Basically, technology mediates every single aspect of our lives. It plays an enormous role in the ways we build social connections and maintain social connection to one another. It plays an enormous role in culture and meme generation and repetition of themes and the ways in which people understand how they connect to the broader world. It plays a huge role in our economy. And obviously, I think we could all agree that it's played a pretty significant role in our politics over the past year or two or beyond. And so it would be insane for us in the labor movement to not think that we have a role in both contesting the power of the people that are building that technology and also using that technology ourselves. This is absolutely where workers are. I often think about social platforms as the modern version of those back rooms and bars and church basements where workers have been coming together for generations to try and organize. Workers will always find a way to find one another, and this is where they're finding one another right now. But I think that if we actually both want to harness and contest the power of these technology platforms, we actually have to understand what have been the drivers of this explosion over the past 10 years. What are the economics of the platforms? Both because it impacts the ways that workers are able to have power, but it also has real-time labor market implications. It helps to give us signals about what work might be like in the next 10 to 20 years. Basically, when you think about the current economy, out of the 10 highest valued stocks, 7 are technology companies. The top 3 are Apple, Alphabet, which is Google, and Amazon, and then 7 is Facebook and 3 is Microsoft, 7 is Facebook, and 9 is Amazon. So technology companies really actually dominate the economy. They are determining the norms. And I was really interested in figuring out, why did these companies in particular receive the kind of investment that actually capitalized them to make them dominant? Because there's this myth, it's like a recycled market myth kind of that we apply to Silicon Valley, which is that people who make the most interesting and magical, innovative products are the ones that reach all of us, and that the best kinds of things are what we end up using, and those are the things that scale. But the truth is that the things that get capitalized most massively are often the things that scale. There are a lot of things that fail that get capitalized, but it's really hard to succeed and achieve scale without being capitalized. And so one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is why what are the functionalities of those particular technologies that are receiving capital and why? Like, what is the return that these investors are getting on these technologies? And what is very clear is that a lot of these investors are investing in the potential of the data that these platforms extract. Shoshana Zuboff I want to make sure to shout out people who've done a lot of writing on this that just basically taught me what I'm talking about. So Shoshana Zuboff has this term, surveillance capitalism, which talks about how many of these platforms are built to expertly extract data from you as you're using them. And I thought about that a lot in terms of like how that might actually have implications for the labor market. Basically, Google and Facebook in particular, when they first were created, they were optimized in order to make money from selling ads. And the ways that ads worked was that they extracted a bunch of data from you to figure out what exactly they could probably sell you. From there, what they started to realize was that once they perfected the art of data extraction, they could start to use the data that was extracted to do all kinds of other things, which is where we see this boom in automation, we see this boom in the growth of artificial intelligence, is that you start to perfect platforms for extracting data for one purpose, and then you start putting that data to use for many other purposes. And the thing about data is that it doesn't function like a hard commodity in like an industrial economy. It can be repurposed, repackaged, and reused over and over and over again, and it can be put back into the system that pulled it out of you in the first place, and used to actually more effectively collect more data from you the next time. And so what we've been experiencing is this boom in the production of technologies that are designed for data extraction. So that might seem like, exclusively like a consumer issue. I think we probably all know to be pretty freaked out and scared by that. But I think that it also helps us think about the ways in which the kinds of platforms that we've been seeing enter the workforce have been able to attract investment. And to think about the kinds of things that workers are going to actually have to contend with when they're bargaining for power over the next 10 to 20 years, and how profit is generated through the places where they're working. So what I really mean by that is, if we think about the fact that there are probably 3 ways in which work is currently being digitally mediated in some way, and I'm being really broad about this. One are people who are working on on-demand platforms, which we all know a lot about because we all talk about all the time, or at least I do.
What people might not know. What is an on-demand platform?
Sorry. So an on-demand platform or a gig platform is where you as an individual go to this technology, and it's Uber, it's Lyft, it's TaskRabbit, it's Postmates, it's Instacart. You sign on and you are assigned tasks by an algorithm that receives information from people who want to buy those tasks, whatever that is, in order to get something done. So it's basically an entirely automated labor market. And the barriers to entry are very low. You can just get on if you have like a mobile phone, and if you are a driver, you need to have a car, etc. And in that context, the work is entirely digitally mediated. For people in the retail and service sector, I often describe their work as being partially digitally mediated. So scheduling software means that most retail workers, even though they might have a boss and they might work for a brick and mortar corporation, most of what actually determines their shifts and what their day is going to look like is done by scheduling software that takes information that's fed into it the week before, makes determinations about the labor that's going to be needed for the next week, and then schedules them to do their shifts. And also, in a lot of those sectors, there's productivity software. So they figure out if they think you're working hard enough. The algorithm makes a determination about how many sales you should be making, or how fast you should be getting things done, and then it rates your performance based on your ability to meet those productivity metrics. So that's that's one version of a partially digitally mediated work environment. The third one is in the white-collar sector, which is often sees a lot of software and technology being used to act as almost like a quasi-HR manager. Basically, there's this huge growth in what I call workplace surveillance software. They call it other things. But it basically tracks your keystrokes, it tracks how you move through the building, it tracks your tone in emails, what you look for online, and it A lot of it develops like a behavioral analytics profile of you and determines your flight risk. So if you're likely to leave, then they're much more likely to give you a raise. So in the old days, everybody in the firm would get a raise at the end of the year because you wanted to keep the workforce happy. Now you can target who gets a raise and who doesn't based on their flight risk. And when you think about that in the context of privilege, people who are more valuable to the labor market, which is a labor market that tends to overvalue white men, are the ones who end up, it just reinforces the fact that that's who gets raises, that's who gets promotions, and people who are less likely to be able to move throughout the labor market are sort of stuck in place. So you know, in all of these cases though, all of the software is designed again to like pull information out of you and then use it in such a way as to manage you. And I really believe that specifically in the on-demand sector, the reason that we've seen a growth in logistics-based platforms like cars and deliveries is because when people were making their investments, were capitalizing platforms, they were capitalizing toward data. The most useful and easiest place to apply data is in creating automated transit and logistics hubs. Uber described their own mission in 2013 as wanting to build a global digital mesh around the world and to dominate logistics. And so those are the first platforms that get capitalized because that's the easiest argument you can make about the value of the data that's being generated by people providing services on those platforms. But what ends up happening is that once that model for labor management and labor allocation is inculcated, then it can be applied to multiple other sectors because they've sort of perfected it in this highly capitalized environment. So what I predict is going to happen is that the reason that Uber is important, aside from the fact that they are impacting transport and logistics incredibly, is that the model of people accessing work through a platform can now be applied to multiple other sectors. And we're going to start to see that happen in lots of other places. So we already see in the retail sector people attempting to make platforms where there's one called Shift Pixie, where basically they hire the labor force and then they allocate the labor force to whatever stores want people to work shifts or whatever restaurants want people to work shifts. And you know, I think that's such an interesting case, right? Because in the labor movement of right now, we're having this fight about misclassification. Shift Pixie actually positions itself as getting you out of the misclassification fight because they hire you as a W-2 employee, but it does not make things any better for any of the workers because they're still working on whatever shifts come up on this platform. And now they're basically practicing labor market domination by pooling all of those workers onto one platform and allocating them as they see fit. And again, like this is a technology that was built because it was capitalized in order to extract data, to build these systems, but then it ends up influencing the ways in which a lot of other people are able to get work. And you know, another place where we're seeing this have a lot of potential disruption is in the like sort of middle management and white collar sector. Because if you think about it, what these platforms actually do is they manage task allocation and performance ratings, and that's what management level people do. The Institute for the Future created ICEO a couple years ago, which essentially automated every possible managerial function in a white-collar workplace within like a couple of months. So it is possible.
Wait, how did it do that?
Sorry,
you're in a role. We talked beforehand. I'm allowed to interrupt when.
Yeah.
When
oh
I'm
yeah,
confused.
that's right. Louis
when I'm
has
confused,
permission.
I'm allowed to ask questions.
From what I understand, like it's been a couple months just like taking as much information as possible about like who was qualified to do what, like the managers trained the systems basically on the processes they use to make decisions about XYZ within the context of a corporate firm. And it just like smushed down the need for multiple managers making multiple decisions at once.
So does it work for deans?
I don't know.
Sorry. Please go ahead.
I mean, as good labor activists, we should all be glad that management's going away. But I don't know, guys.
I love my dean. Yeah, sorry. Please go on.
So yeah, I mean, so my point is that and the sort of the reason that I'm all in the weeds here on this is because I think that it's really important for us to be, if we're thinking about what the future of work is going to be for people, to really think about what is being capitalized now and what kinds of systems are being prioritized over other systems for people to actually be able to access work. And further, I think that what it does is it brings up a whole set of workplace issues for people that we have not really had to contend with before. So I've been thinking a lot about the fact that because workers are producing this data that is actually creating very profitable platforms for these companies, that they should have some kind of bargaining right to the value of that data. If we're talking about, let's say in a fantasy world, some group of workers gets to a bargaining table to the owners of one of these platforms, the fact they're creating value in two ways. They're creating value by performing whatever task it is that they're performing in the moment. That's one. And then the second one is the long-term value and use of the data that they're sort of building into the system over time that is going to allow that technology to ultimately dominate that sector. And so why shouldn't we be at least demanding the right to some share of the profit off of that data? And further, because these systems are collecting massive amounts of data from people and making decisions about their well-being, their mobility, their performance, their ability to get shifts, we should know something about the ways that the systems are making decisions on behalf of people. This is a huge issue, especially in the on-demand economy, where these algorithms are totally opaque. Nobody really knows how they work. Many of the companies say that it's their intellectual property and they can't give away trade secrets. I think that's like total bullshit. But essentially,
that's a technical term, right?
Yeah,
bullshit's a technical term.
Yeah.
Legally speaking.
Yeah. It's I checked with the NLRB.
Okay.
So they say that they can't give up that data, but I actually think that if we're weighing in the near future worker well-being versus your right to your trade secrets, like what are the things that we're going to start valuing in this economy? And further, when we think about the long-term implications of like automation, you could think about the workers who actually build that automated system continuing to profit off of it even when maybe those jobs go away and creating some kind of long-term economic stability for the workers. And so a lot of the advice that I've been giving to folks at the city and municipal level and even sometimes at the federal level is that we need to start really thinking about data as a labor right, data transparency, data privacy, people's ability to control what is extracted from them and to know how it's being used. And I also think that most of this debate is happening in a consumer context where it's much harder to actually make the argument that people deserve to know what data is being collected because they have a debt mentality about the fact that like I get Facebook, I get like my grandkids' photos, and in exchange, I just give them all my data, and it seems like a fair trade, and that's okay. It's not. But in the work context, you've already put an economic value on that relationship, and so it actually creates like a sort of narrative context in which to further that demand, to make that part of the ways in which you are relating to that kind of economic power. And just a great story that I'm excited about, the NFL Players Association, who's been great on a lot of fronts lately, they actually successfully won the right to ownership of the data that players generate on their Fitbits when they're practicing. So initially, the NFL wanted to own that data, and the Players Association was like, no, that belongs to our players, that's about their bodies and how their bodies perform, and they should have the right to own that data. And they won. They won that through collective bargaining. And we see in all of these other contexts in which we're seeing workers who are having massive amounts of data extracted, it is the difference between having a collective power inside your workplace and not, in terms of being able to make demands on that data. So I know that sounds like really far away from what we do at coworker.org, but I do think that it starts to help us begin to surface the issues that workers are going to be thinking about and caring about going forward. But I did also want to just share with you a little bit of what we've been learning on the platform and what we've seen workers be able to do through using popular technology tools to self-organize. Like I said, our mission is to create a place where workers can be experimenting, where people can try things that they maybe wouldn't be able to try in a more established organization, and to start to really be able to surface what people care about and what really matters to them in their workplaces. So I'm just going to talk about like 3 sets of workers that have been organizing on our platform. Yes.
Can I just?
Yes.
I think everyone here might not be familiar with how it began or what you guys have done in the past. And it might be, before we get to the awesome new stuff, can we talk about the awesome old stuff?
Yes, I'm going to start with our tattoo story.
Oh, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, good. Good.
I would never do a presentation without talking about tattoos.
It's my favorite thing in the world. Okay. Free tattoos for everybody tonight. Okay.
So as I said before, coworker.org is a digital platform, and basically the way it functions is that you come to the platform, you start a campaign on something you care about. We help you use social media and traditional media to get the word out, to build a network of your fellow employees, and then this network becomes this communications hub for people to try other kinds of campaigns, and I'll tell you all of the other things that we do in a second. So our largest and most active network is our Starbucks employee network. We have 38,000 Starbucks baristas from 34 countries around the world. It's about just under 15% of Starbucks' global workforce, and they've run roughly 50 campaigns on our platform since 2014. The first campaign that was run by a barista was run by a 24-year-old woman named Christy Williams in Atlanta, Georgia. She started her campaign 3 years ago, really right around right now. And she had a tattoo of her daughter's name on her forearm. And the air conditioner in her Starbucks was broken for 3 weeks. And she was having to work with long sleeves because you were not allowed to have visible tattoos at Starbucks in 2014. So after 3 weeks of sweating all over her clothes and getting syrup all over her sleeves, she came to coworker.org and she started a campaign. And it was very simple demand. It said, let us have visible tattoos. And within days, she shared it with like a couple Twitter handles that are for baristas and there are a lot of little groups of people who have the same employer or work in the same occupation on places like Facebook and Reddit. So she shared it a couple of places there, and we saw it come up, but we hadn't like gotten around to reaching out. And suddenly there were like thousands of baristas signing onto this campaign within days. So we called her, and our sort of method of outreach to workers is to really just say, what do you need? What can we do? Do you want any help? And if they want help, then we help. If they don't want help, then we say, that's okay. You can go do it. And so the first thing that she was noticing was that when people were signing onto the petition or commenting on it on Facebook, they were telling the story of their tattoo. They'd be like, oh, I got this because blah, blah, blah. And so she wanted to do an Instagram campaign where you photographed your tattoo and you told the story of it. So we worked with her to like basically come up with the hashtag, barista, and get the word out about the campaign, and hundreds of baristas started posting pictures of their tattoos and telling the story. They organically just started adding a Starbucks corporate hashtag, so Starbucks just started getting like all these pictures of people's tattoos and stories about them. We actually were able to like sort of package that and let reporters know that this was going on. This got a lot of coverage. People were really into it. I will also say many people in the labor movement at the time were really confused about why we were putting so much time into supporting this campaign around visible tattoos. And the pushback that we got was, that is not important. They make these like shitty wages. They don't have scheduling power. Like, why is this the thing that people care about? And to us, there were multiple answers, but there were 2 main ones. Because that's what they care about, and it's not our job to tell people what they should care about in their own workplaces, and because we trust workers to be able to name the things that are actually going to make a huge difference for them. We don't actually determine what is the most important thing. We also had this instinct that workers kind of know the thing that you could probably win in the interim, and that if people have a win, if they have an experience of collective advocacy working, and a culture that tells us that it's never going to work and you shouldn't try, then they're much more likely to think about what the next thing they want to do is, and the next thing and the next thing. So Christy won that campaign. In about 2 months, Starbucks announced that they were overturning the ban on tattoos. There were, at that point, 15,000 baristas who had joined that campaign. And what our job at that point is to communicate back to people, like, here is the thing that you did. And so that's what we did. We wrote an email, we did a bunch of graphics, we talked to people about how collective advocacy made a difference in their workplace. And what we saw within days was a popping up of like 5 more campaigns by baristas about things that they cared about. And that process is what has been taking place with that network over the past 4 or 3 years to now, where people are running 50 campaigns. A couple of other things that we've done with that network that we've experimented with other networks on too are we had been seeing that workers had all these insights about things that were happening at the local level at their workplaces, and we would kind of start to see like little patterns emerging, but we weren't really sure like what to do about that. And we were working with the Center for Popular Democracy, who was trying to figure out if Starbucks had stuck to a commitment they made to reform their scheduling policies. They had said that they weren't going to do clopenings anymore, which is when you have to close the store at like midnight and then open it at 4 and then you can't sleep. And the people they were going to try to get people their schedules like 3 weeks in advance. So we had this network of baristas, and we decided that we would poll them and we would find out what had been happening. And this was our first attempt at collecting frontline worker data to start to track patterns inside workplaces. What we found was that clopenings were still happening. There were indicators that it was actually a glitch in the software. It was not Starbucks' intention to not do that anymore, which is like a really interesting finding that you could only get if you were asking people at the front lines. And then what we also learned was that some people were still getting their schedules like only 1 week or 2 weeks in advance. So we packaged that data, we called the New York Times. The New York Times wrote a story about it because they had written a story on scheduling 6 months before, and we were able to get Starbucks to pay attention to this. And it was really this combination of worker-first data, of really figuring out directly from workers what's happening on the front lines in their stores, and then being able to use that in a way that we're putting a megaphone behind it so people can hear the story. And that taught us a lot about what you can find out about a workplace by polling some workers. So we have used that many, many times in other networks. I was just talking earlier about our Uber driver network. When Uber cut fares, we have about 5,000 Uber drivers. When Uber cut fares in January of 2016 in 80 cities, a worker from Tampa started a campaign and many people joined it. It was one of those moments early on when drivers it was like they really lost faith in the platform for the first time. And Uber was sort of publicly saying that they had made this decision because it would increase ride requests and it would increase fares for drivers. And so we wanted to know if that was actually happening. So we polled the drivers, and we found out that from the drivers that reported to us, we're losing $100 to $200 a week from the fare cuts, that they were not making more money. We also got enormous amounts of qualitative data about the actual lived experience of being an Uber driver in the midst of these cuts and the ways in which all of these other external economic pressures were pushing people to drive on the platform in the first place, and then the fare cuts just made that situation all the more desperate. So we very frequently poll and survey workers, and we're using that data to try and sort of track patterns over time and then feed that data back to workers. So like there's a version of data extraction that's sort of just for the benefit of some outside force. We're trying to repurpose this idea of collecting data and give it back to workers so that they can actually have some power and leverage over their companies. There is one last thing on Starbucks. Most recently, a worker named Jamie Prater, who's been with us for years, he had started noticing that there were labor shortages in stores. This was last summer. Workers were reporting to one another through their network and on Facebook and to Jamie that they were also seeing these labor shortages, and they were starting to suspect that this was like a corporate-wide pattern. So they ran a campaign, 18,000 baristas ran this campaign on labor shortages, and Jamie got a meeting with Starbucks corporate to talk about it. He was on CNN, he was like all over the place. But before he went in, he and a group of workers actually created a 7-part vision statement for how they wanted Starbucks to take on this issue. And they covered the impact of the labor shortages from multiple perspectives. So they talked about not just what was happening to baristas, but what the consumer experience was because of the labor shortages. They talked about the shareholder value going down because of the labor shortages. They brought in all of these different perspectives, and were able to actually produce like a really generative document. And I think that's very important when we're talking about workers engaging in any kind of collective action that is actually a really generative process. It often gets pictured, and we often participate in that, picturing as like just always like an us against them kind of narrative. But these are workers who actually really care deeply about their workplaces and wanted to figure out ways to actually actively solve this problem. So, and what's interesting about all of those Starbucks stories is, one, the tattoos campaign created a flurry of tattoos campaigns at a bunch of other employers. You would not believe the draconian dress code policies in this country. And that people have won the right to have tattoos at other places like Jimmy John's. We have this long-standing campaign at Publix, the Southern grocery store chain. 10,000 Publix workers who just want to have a beard. Like, that's all they want. They've been running that campaign for 2 years. Publix is standing strong. So, you know, that has been something that's been really inspiring to us, is that what we see is that workers are Googling around about dress code policies. They find campaigns that have been run on Coworker, and then it models behavior for them that they then copy. And our REI network, which has won wage increases and scheduling reform, they directly reference the work that Starbucks workers have done on the platform as their inspiration for starting all of their campaigns. And just this year, they created an annual report by REI employees. So there was like the company's annual report, and then there was the REI workers' annual report. And they had done their own surveys and polling, and it was great. It was so good. We're so proud of it. So people are doing like a lot of different things and really learning from one another about how they might be organizing in this sort of new context. I'm just going to tell 2 more network stories, and then I will shut up. I'm sure most of you know the story about Wells Fargo and the creation of fake bank accounts, basically. That actually was a campaign that was started on coworker.org in October of 2013. Bank tellers were joining this campaign that was basically asking Wells Fargo to stop it with the overzealous sales goals. That was the framing that they had at the time. And what they were saying was, you know, this pressure to meet these sales goals is causing us and our coworkers to engage in fraudulent behavior every day. We're pressured to basically, I mean, what we heard a lot was they were the same 4 elderly ladies would come into the bank all the time, because most people bank online, and they were having to pressure them over and over and over again, people in their own neighborhoods, to have these bad banking products. So we worked in partnership with the Committee for Better Banks, who did a ton of field work and a ton of work to actually show up at shareholder meetings and organize bank tellers on this campaign. And what we learned was that much later, after Elizabeth Warren roasted the CEO and the CEO was ousted and all of this stuff was revealed, was that the chief risk officer was reading through employee comments on coworker.org all the way back in 2013, assessing the risk to the company based on the sales pressure. And I mean, so I have the quote. Yeah, so he read highly critical comments by Wells Fargo employees in an online petition relating to sales pressure and sales practices. This heightened concern led him to make a decision to escalate sales practices to the board as a significant risk. And so this is just an example of the ways in which workers, when they're able to operate in aggregate and they're able to have a megaphone, can actually start to hold companies accountable in ways that go far beyond what we think of as traditional labor organizing around wages and benefits, but are really connected directly to a common good, an economic good. And what I also love about that campaign is that this was an effort by workers who were organizing around their ethics and morals. Like, so many of the comments that we heard from people were about, there was one that I always remember of her just saying that she would just go back to her car and cry because she couldn't believe she was doing this to the people in her community. And so I think that, especially as we're thinking about operating in a context of increasing monopolistic behavior, a reduced ability at the federal level to actually, or willingness to actually push back on corporate abuse, it is the employees themselves who are going to be a huge source of accountability for companies in the economy going forward. And so one last piece I just wanted to talk about as we're thinking again about organizing around ethics and morals is the newest sort of explosion of activity on our site, which is by tech workers, people who are employed by technology companies like IBM and Oracle and lots of other places. So post-election, many tech employees sort of went through this process of really thinking about the implications of creating mass databases of people's names and locations and identities that might be accessible by an increasingly hostile federal government. There was an early effort by these tech workers to create what was called neveragain.tech, where they all gathered in a petition to say that they would not create a Muslim registry. But I think that for a lot of other workers, in the back of their minds, they knew that they had already created a de facto Muslim registry, like based on a lot of the data that their companies were collecting. And so these workers are actually really interested in thinking about how to use their collective power to take control over the labor that they're providing to these companies. And we're thinking about like how we can be helpful to them. So right after the election, Ginny Rometty, the CEO of IBM, wrote a letter to the Trump administration saying that she would love to be a part of, that she would love the Trump administration to use her smart technology as part of rolling out their programs. There were a lot of people who worked at IBM who did not want any role in that whatsoever, so they started a campaign on coworker.org, basically asking for Rometty to reaffirm her commitment to diversity and inclusion in the face of these comments of the Trump administration, and also included a line about like being able to opt out of working on any government contracts. Which I thought was a really interesting demand and request, and would require levels of transparency that I'm sure that folks were not quite ready for it at IBM. But like 2,000 people around the world joined that campaign, and they actually created this really powerful network of employees inside the company that stay in touch on issues that really matter to them. We also saw this at Oracle. Oracle employees have run 2 different campaigns trying to get the company to take a stand on behalf of DACA recipients. They wanted them to file with all of the other tech companies in the amicus brief for immigrant workers. And most recently, we've had a campaign by Etsy engineers. Etsy's been going through a change. There's a new CEO. Engineers are really concerned about how Etsy is going to maintain its commitment to being a triple bottom line company, and to being focused on sellers versus being a traditional e-commerce company. And so they've been organizing themselves through the platform. And we're also in lots of conversations with a lot of other folks at other companies who are really interested in learning about how to build collective power. These are workers who make a lot of money and who have a lot of comforts, but are still very aware that they don't have an enormous amount of power about the way their own labor is used. And one of them said that they only have a form of negative power, which is we can leave or we can ask for more money, but we can't actually ask for anything else. And I think that in this moment, again, when we're thinking about the power of these companies and the influence that they're having over all of our lives and the futures for many, many workers, building out a constituency of really thoughtful, analytical workers inside tech who are thinking about how their collective power could be used to do something better is a critical piece of this sort of broader labor movement that we're trying to build for the future. So that's about it. I will stop talking now and take questions. But just to conclude, again, we're seeing a lot of our institutions in a really stark moment right now. Labor is contracting. Our agencies are harder to get in touch with. But what we know is that workers always organize no matter what is happening. And so we really see our role as providing that sort of like front door and welcome mat to the labor movement in a way to actually rebuild and restructure the institutions that stand behind us going forward. So thanks.
Well, I could just listen to you talk for hours, so
Okay.
I think the rest of us could too. One of the things I just kept thinking about as you were talking was how so much of this is about how workers are resisting being turned into transactional commodities. Mm-hmm. Like workers pushing back on this idea that they are just there as part of this cog in the machine, that they are not there to have their own bodies. Uh-huh. They are not there to have their own ethics. They are not there to actually serve customers, right? Mm-hmm. And it seems like a lot of what you're talking about is something that did occur in the post-war labor movement when labor mm-hmm. unions were strong, that it fulfilled this check on other kinds of power in society. Mm-hmm. And do you find that people are thinking it that way as they're pushing back? They're like, I'm not just my wage, I'm also this person doing something in the world, and this sort of return of workers as a public voice? I'm just curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that they are thinking that way. I mean, especially when they talk about the dress code campaigns, they're like, I deserve to be able to come to work as who I am. Like, there's no reason that you have control over my body. What we're also seeing that I find incredibly warming, and I think that is generally unexpected because everything that we do takes place through digital platforms, is the way in which people are building really heartfelt community with one another, that they shelter one another in a lot of different ways, and the comment sections on, it just looks like text on a page, and then you read it, and there are beautiful things that are happening where people are standing up for one another. They're telling each other they love each other, that they care about each other, and these are workers. Like, these are people. But
Do you mean more than solidarity, right? Like real solidarity.
Yeah,
right?
like deep solidarity. There was
yeah.
there was a Publix employee who posted something on Reddit, and they were talking about how, like, their mother had died and they couldn't get over, and they wanted to know if there was a grief hotline. And someone else posted and said, well, you could call me. And, like, they don't know them. And, like, so many of these places are creating spots for people to actually engage in that kind of person-to-person solidarity, which I think is something that the labor movement provided space, physical brick and mortar space for in the mid-century, and was about the fact that we are not just here to perform a set of tasks, but we are a community, we are human beings, we love each other. And what I think is really heartwarming is, like, even in the face of some pretty faceless, drony technology, people are reaching out to one another in order to reclaim that humanity and connection.
And what you were saying before is that it wasn't just mid-century sort of halls, like union halls, but going back to the saloon, right? The saloon as a center of male working class life, right?
Yes.
These were spaces of solidarity, and that's why they were attempted to be banned during Prohibition. Alcohol was not banned during Prohibition. Saloons were banned during Prohibition.
Yes.
And so these kinds of spaces as working class institutions is the culture. I mean, this is an old part of labor history that I'm so excited. The other part, before I let everyone else talk, I was so excited about, we often talk about the digital revolution as driven by technology. And you constrained that. You said, no, it's driven by capitalized technology, right? But at the other end, you were also talking about laborized technology. This technology is being made by people. People are working on these things, they're building the software. What would it be like if technology were controlled by workers or by the people building the software rather than venture capital funds, by logistics firms that are looking for the next way to make money? I mean, if you could speak to that a little.
Yeah, I mean, I think that technology would absolutely prioritize a series of other things and human values that currently most technology doesn't. There is an enormous movement, the platform cooperative movement, and a lot of folks who are really thinking about how we actually create technology that we all own. And it's like I was listening to someone talking about the history of makers 2 days ago. And I was thinking about the fact that, like, that technology could have gone more in that direction, where we were building these small things that improved our lives and that we controlled in a different way. But that we have come to understand technology as something that some other genius owns somewhere and that we could never possibly understand. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing, like, I think what people are doing on Coworker, I think, like, there are a lot of people in the labor space who are also thinking about building technology that is actually serves the purpose of people, not serves the purpose of profit. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's got an enormous amount of potential. What we actually have to figure out how to do is build all of those. I'm a little hesitant about, like, bespoke technology that we build ourselves, because then we still have to contest for the power and contend with the power of the existing dominant capitalized technology forces. And so sometimes I get a little nervous when we talk about that, because I'm like, we can't hide down in there. Because these, like, big ubiquitous platforms are still exist. Anyway, sorry, I'm not going to go on about that. But yeah, I think that's that.
Yeah, every time his capital's exerted power through technology, labor's found a way to reorganize themselves through the same technology.
Yes.
So
yes.
Let's take some questions from the audience, though. I'm sure everyone has lots of questions. Yeah.
So I can understand how. Thank you. How the online campaign about tattoos in the workplace affects is protected by the National Labor Relations Act. Would you say that the same organizing about what you were saying about IBM, about not using their technology or data, if the Trump administration wanted to use it, would that same kind of protest or same kind of collective action be protected by the National Labor Relations Act?
It's a good question, and I'm not clear, to be perfectly honest. I mean, for one reason, lots of people that are not covered by the NLRA, like managers and contractors, often join and participate in these campaigns. So there's that. But I think that probably not this NLRB, but maybe another NLRB, you could make the argument that that is a part of your working conditions. So protected concerted activity is 2 or more people organizing to improve their working conditions. If you could make the argument that the stress of contributing to something that violates your core beliefs is impacting your working conditions, then I think you could make the argument that it's protected concerted activity. But I don't think it's like a natural fit in the same way that wages and working conditions are, though, I think the thing about it, though, is that most of the NLRA is so broken that trying to stay constrained within the protections offered by the NLRA would basically limit most people from engaging in any kind of organizing that mattered to them. So, yeah.
Please. Can you wait for the microphone, just so our friends in Bulgaria can hear you?
Hi. Hello, yeah. I was wondering if any of this work has led to collective bargaining, contracts, and as much as I really love this idea and the space you've created, I guess my old union brain's concern is, I'm wondering if it's your concern or what you're doing about people who maybe have some of their, the tattoos or air conditioning and the, lower level, important but lower level concerns addressed, but then are happy enough and don't maybe then go for collective bargaining or addressing the most important issues, the most brutal issues to negotiate with an employer who really doesn't want to give that power up.
So the first question, yeah, we have had people go on to organize unions in their workplace. The early campaign was run by Capital Bike Share employees. Bike shares that, where you take the bike and you go. They were in DC. Bike Share had committed to paying them a certain wage and was not paying them that wage, had signed a contract with the city, so it was a wage theft violation. So they ran that campaign. I think they won that campaign. They got restitution from the DOL, and then they came back a year later and contacted the network that they had created for when they were filing their union cards. And we've had unions run campaigns on the platform. So yeah, in some cases they have. As you know, probably better than anyone, getting to a point of a collective bargaining campaign is really, really long and hard. And we've only been around for 4 years. And so I think that there are lots of workers who want eventually to get to that point, but that we're operating in a context when that is just, regardless of where you are, an incredibly difficult thing for you to be able to do. And especially in a really disaggregated and online context, I think it even takes longer to be able to do something like that.
Has it been the case that the SEIU or other unions have reached out to you to help you go from that step to the organizing campaigns? No, but we've had unions. So that probably would make it easier.
Yeah, that would probably make it easier.
Maybe if union officials would reach out and then help workers do this.
Yes. That would make it. Yes,
Okay.
That would make it easier.
Just to be clear.
Yeah. We had American Airlines flight attendants who are members of a union run a campaign that then they coordinated. They did it on their own, but then they amassed enough signatures to coordinate with their union head to file a grievance with the signatures. And on the second question, I think that's an organizing question more than a platform question. I think that in all circumstances when you're organizing, there are people who get the improvements in the cafeteria and then they don't show up at meetings anymore. And that's just what we contend with when we're engaging in this kind of workplace organizing. People get tired, people don't want to do it anymore. But people also get energy. And I really think you have to give people wins in order for them to engage in the level of risk that you do over something that is higher stakes.
Yeah, Deborah?
I'm just wondering if you've had cases of employer retaliation.
We, if there's wood, I will knock it. It has been not really, no. We've had workers let us know that maybe their hours got cut or something a little rough happened, and then we connected them with a lawyer, and then they were fine. But I think partially because we were operating in, until January, we were operating in a context where the NLRB was fairly supportive of protected concerted activity, that it wasn't worth it to employers, especially because we use media so much. That's not a story anybody wants to tell. I do wonder if, in the Murphy Oil case that's being reviewed right now at the Supreme Court, there was some indication that they considered protective concerted activity residual and less important, or not, that if you were engaging in that, that you were not seeking to form a union, then that it wasn't a protected activity, which is terrifying. And I think that if that were sort of to come to fruition, or there was precedent set around that, what that would do would be embolden employers to start reacting against workers.
I was wondering what, if any, campaigns have you had from either law firms or law firm service providers?
We have not had any campaigns from law firms. We did have, we supported the Women's World Cup soccer players in 2015 who were asking, FIFA was making them play on artificial turf. The men played on grass. And so they filed a gender discrimination complaint in Canada and worked with a law firm. So that campaign led to them working with a law firm that actually filed that complaint. But we haven't done any direct work with law firms on campaigns.
I was referring specifically to the document review industry. Has that come up within your lens or not?
I don't know. No. I'm curious about why you're asking. What do you see?
Well, it's a large industry. Okay, basically, the top law firms hire service providers who do document review. They're not necessarily attorneys. You have other people involved too, and it's a large industry. Highly paid industry, but it has a lot of issues.
But I think part of it, the thing that is really special about Coworker is that you're not in charge. Michelle's not in charge.
Yeah,
Michelle,
show up.
They show up. They come to Coworker, and then Michelle doesn't decide that she's going to organize, right?
Yeah, no, we don't. No, that's true. Yeah, we have no control over who starts a campaign on our platform and what it's about. So, if you know someone who's in document review and they've got some complaints.
On that same point of you don't actually choose the campaigns, have you had anything what one might consider negative campaigns?
We have terms of service, and so any campaign that violates our terms of service doesn't become a campaign. So you can't attack people, you can't engage in racial, gender discrimination. You can't reveal, reveal secrets about other people. You can't commit libel. And we've had those, of course, because it's the internet. If you violate our terms of service, we send you an email and we say, a couple times I think it's been about phrasing. We say we can't show your campaign. It violates the terms of service for these reasons. If you want to edit it, you're welcome to edit it. But so that's been that. I mean, in terms of a negative demand. We haven't really, I'm trying to think, we haven't really, we definitely have battling campaigns. So the American Airlines flight attendants were on two sides of the issue that they were campaigning on. And so there was literally half were, and please do not make me try to remember the very esoteric issue they were having around boarding, but one set was for and one set was against, and they were running different campaigns, which we thought was super cool because that means that a lot of people are really engaged in the issue. During the IBM campaign, somebody ran a counter campaign against it, and we were very interested in seeing if like lots of people signed on. They didn't. Like it just didn't get the same kind of traction and attention. So yeah, people start opposing campaigns sometimes. People start negative campaigns. Yeah.
Using, say, IBM's example,
Mm-hmm.
how do you keep management from reviewing who's posting what and complaining about what and keeping track of such things?
So we do and we don't in some ways. I mean, one, people know that they're taking a calculated risk by using an open platform that anybody can see. If you are the person who created the campaign, you use your first and last name unless there is a really good reason for you not to. So we had contractors at an airport who had experienced sexual abuse by their employer. We allowed them to run an anonymous campaign, but generally we prefer that you use your name. It also helps with being protected under concerted activity because there's a digital track record of the fact that you were engaging in workplace organizing if you face retaliation. For everyone else, when you sign, the only thing that's visible is the last 3 names with an initial beside them. And then your first name is visible if you post a comment. And so you're opting in to how visible you want to be in the course of posting comments on the campaign or engaging in the campaign or sharing the campaign. But we generally trust workers to show whatever level of discretion they feel comfortable using when they're posting.
Employees allow protection by using, say, a nickname as opposed to their real name if it's a very distinctive real name?
Yeah,
Okay.
we had, and I won't say the name of the company, but we had a company that was small, and they knew that the people had, there were more people that had unique names, and so they turned off that little list on the side
Oh,
where you
excellent.
couldn't see, you just couldn't see the
That's
names.
good. So there are worker protections
Yeah.
in that sense.
If we
Okay,
could take one
thank you.
question from the internet. So I have questions from the internet here. And a lot of them are actually, you guys already asked, so we don't have to worry about this. But thanks for the questions anyway. One of them we haven't asked, which is, we've been talking a lot about the US. A lot of these firms you're talking about are global multinationals. And this is a question, I guess, from someone overseas, because they spell labor with a U.
Oh, that's how you know.
You know, whichever else in the
Yeah.
educated world, that's how it's spelled. You know, what is the implications of this? Have you seen multinational campaigns, or is this just about America?
Yeah, no, multinational campaigns are very, very regular. I mean, our networks are by their nature global networks. So Starbucks is 34 countries, Uber is like 17 countries, and most of the network, the IBM network, is an international network. So most of the networks that are at multinational companies are multinational networks. I actually think this is really, really important when we're thinking about the future of labor organizing. Is like, how do you build solidarity among workers in these multinational corporations across the world? How do you build it up and down supply chains? So you're starting to think about people in corporate actually legitimately being connected to people who work in the warehouse and starting to think of them as like a unit. And I mean, I think that, you know, we're also, by the way, very much in like a beta stage. This is a very nascent version of what we want this to be. Someday, I would love for us to have someone in every country who can actually talk to campaign creators and petition creators in their native language and help them through their own campaigns, that we could be a multilingual site, that we're able to service people from anywhere in the world who want to start and launch a campaign. So if you know anyone with like $10 million, let me know, and we'll get started on it.
I don't have $10 million. I'd write you a check right now. We're going to have one more question and then end the session.
This has been fascinating. A question I had, because it just kind of popped into mind, is my friend here, Melanie, and I have this situation where, what if an employer, or employees rather, don't have access to technology? We know a lot of older people who are just reject it. How do you deal with that? How do they get involved?
That's a good question, and it's tricky because you can't. I think that there are ways. I mean, one, you can print out the petitions and get people to hand sign things, so that is one very easy way. In terms of very low wage workers, most low wage workers have a mobile phone. That's how you're connected to everything. We have a number of networks that have old. We compared our user data with census block data to get an analysis of like who's actually using our platform, and we do have folks in older sectors. But I do think that's like a huge question about like folks who are on varying levels of digital literacy. I have heard that the largest growing user base on Facebook is over 65.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting there. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a totally legit question, and we're yeah.
$10 million or more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's my answer to
Thank you.
everything we're not
Thank you.
doing.
And radical grandparents are the way to go.
Yes.
It's hard to push back on radical grandparents.
Yes.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming tonight. We're going to chat for a little while. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
And thank you to our online audience.